Hey guys, and welcome back to a brand new video. Now today's video is going to be another how to edit like, but today I'm going to be showing you guys how to edit in my style. So this is my Instagram account here. If you guys don't follow me, please do go ahead and give me a follow. This is where I answer pretty much every single one of the DMs I get. So if any of you guys have got any questions or you want to see what I'm up to behind the scenes of filming these videos or anything like that, any questions on my presets, stuff like that, just come ahead, follow me on Matthew_GKB, check out some of my stuff, and then of course if you want to send me any messages, I'll be happy to reply to you. And on here I even check out some of your accounts, so lots of people tag me in their photos, and if you tag me in one of your photos, I will go ahead and check out the photo, and if I like it I will probably put it on my story and feature it in my account. I'm running a competition at the moment to see if I like any of the photos, and then I'll post one of them on my feed, and if not I'll just post it on my story. So again, I'm really happy to see people's photos, so yeah, please do go ahead and give me a follow, and if you want to tag me in one of your photos, and I will be very happy to go ahead and check it out. Okay, so this is my account here. As you can tell at the moment I'm kind of going for this blue theme. The blue theme pretty much running through the entirety of my feed at the moment. It kind of started around here, mainly this photo here. This is the photo we're going to be editing in today's video, but I've got a few photos that I'm going to be posting. I'll be posting a new one tonight, and I'm basically following this blue theme. Now, first thing I'd like to point out is when you start off an Instagram like this, it's really important to think about what your theme is going to look like and start sticking to those images. Now, personally I find it pretty hard to stick to a certain style because I become quite creative sometimes when I get my photos, and I really want to start editing some really crazy stuff, and I get bored very easily of taking certain photos. So what I decided to do for this theme was stick with a blue theme, and I think I'm pretty much nailing that at the moment, but at the same time I want to kind of switch up between landscape photos like this one and this one here, and swap it up with some portrait photos like this one here. Got some other portrait ones. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to go through and switch up a few things. I'll show you on in a second the photo we'll be editing, and then the next photo we'll be uploading. But if you guys are interested in any of these edits or anything, or if you want to get a preset pack that's in my style, I will go ahead and I'll create that, and I'll put it up for like 9 quid or 10 quid or something on my website, so you guys can go ahead and download that if you want. But without any further ado, let's just jump straight into today's edit. Okay, so this is the photo here. This is one of my favourite photos that I've posted recently. Something about it I really quite like, and this is the before photo here, so you can see the difference in style that we're going to be kind of editing today. Okay, so jumping straight into the edits. Now the first thing that I would like to point out with when I do all of my edits is I plan what I do with the photo before I start jumping straight into the editing tools. Now the first thing, this is what you probably want to do, the same thing if you're doing a similar kind of style, or if you're doing any form of edit really. You want to kind of look at your photo and work out roughly what you want to do with it. For this look, what I decided to do was put in a tiny bit of fade into the image. I think it was a tiny amount, but keep the image very contrasty, really bright highlights, and keep that that load of contrast going on in there. Now, believe it or not, this wall in the background is actually quite blue when I took the photo, but obviously because it's quite underexposed, you can't really tell the colour. But if you are trying to keep your theme looking quite blue, try and take photos of blue backgrounds or anything in it that's going to be blue. You can kind of bump up the saturation a bit to make sure it really looks quite blue. So what I'm going to be doing for this photo is kind of brightening up those shadows, bringing up the contrast and the clarity a bit, brightening up the luminance on the blue so I can make the wall look a lot brighter. Probably bring these oranges a little bit more towards the pinky orange kind of side, see if I can get this kind of look, and then kind of just brighten things up and keep the contrast there really. So first thing that I want to do is really just to kind of increase that exposure just a small amount. This image was quite underexposed, but I prefer underexposing my images so I can get a lot of detail in the shadows. I'm going to leave the contrast where it is at the moment because it's still pretty contrasty. What I am going to do is bring my highlights up. That's going to brighten up this bit and kind of around all the light areas. Shadows I will probably bring up a small amount, probably to about +20, just so I don't lose all that information in the shadows, and I do want the image to kind of have a little bit of detail in the shadows. Whites, again, I'm going to bring those up pretty high on this one, I think probably about +50. That's just to kind of brighten up the wall, all the light that was shining on the back there. Already if I do it before and then after, you can see the big difference that I've made already. Blacks, I'm just going to take those down a little bit, probably about -4, -5, just to kind of keep that contrast there. Now clarity, one of my favourite sliders, but lots of people really overdo the clarity slider. I wouldn't recommend bringing it above 30. As soon as you start going beyond that, you start looking really strange. So I'm probably going to bring this only to about +10, +20. We'll leave it about +21. That looks pretty good for me. Okay, now this is one of my favourite parts of doing all these editing is how I control my vibrance and saturation. So what I do is I bring my vibrancy down. I always like doing that, and then maybe bringing my saturation up just a tiny amount. Now I find that I prefer the look when I bring the vibrancy down than the look that I get if I bring the vibrancy up and the saturation down. I don't know why, it's just kind of personal preference. Again, just go ahead with what you prefer, but I find that this works better for me for the blues. I kind of get more of a nice blue in my opinion. Okay, so that's the basics panel done. If I do a before and an after, you can see already I've brightened up the image, getting kind of a little bit closer to the look that we want in here. Okay, so I'm going to come down to the tone curve now, and then we're going to look at the graph in the back, this kind of light grey graph going on here. This basically tells me that pretty much all the information that I've got in this image is in the midtones. I've got a bit in the shadows, and I've barely got anything in the highlights down here. So there's not really much point in me controlling the top part here, because it's only going to do a tiny amount. Most of my controlling is going to be in the midtones here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it up in the midtones just to bring in that bit more contrast. Then I'm going to bring my shadows down a little bit as well, just to bring in even more contrast. And then if you want, you can bring in some fade, but with this particular look that I'm going for on my Instagram, I don't really want any fade in my photos. I feel like everyone's using fade at the moment, so I kind of wanted something a little bit more unique. So that'll probably do okay for me at the moment. I might bring up those highlights actually just a little bit more, just to bring in a tiny bit more contrast. Nothing too drastic really on the tone curve, just a really, really rough S-shaped curve, I guess, but really, really faint. Okay, so then the next thing that I come down to is usually the hue, saturation and luminance panel, unless I'm doing an orange and teal color grade. If I'm doing an orange and teal, I'll come straight the way down to my camera calibration, all the way down to the bottom here, and I'll just adjust the camera calibration. But for this one, usually I just go straight to my hue, saturation and luminance panel. Now the first thing that I usually do is I'll just jump straight into the hues and start messing around with those, but for this particular photo I think I might come down to the luminance first. Now I'm just going to quickly explain what these sliders do. So the hues will essentially just change the colour of each of these colours down here. So any reds you can change to more of a pinky colour, or to more of like an orangey yellow, and the same for all of these colours down here. Saturation, self-explanatory, will take the saturation of that particular colour down or up, and the luminance will essentially change the exposure or the brightness of that particular colour. So as I said at the beginning of the video, I kind of want the background here, the blue wall, to be a lot brighter. So you can see I've got a lot of light shining on the background here, and the way that I achieve that usually is to come down to the luminance of the blues and kind of bring the blues upwards. I'm going to do the same with the luminance on the aquas and bring those up. So you can see that makes a little bit of a difference on the blues in the background there. Now obviously what I will do is I will come back later on and bring up the shadows and probably the exposure as well, just to brighten up the whole image. But that's usually what I do to kind of focus in on certain colours. So now I'm going to come up to the hues section. Now the first thing that is probably worth noting is what happens with the orange, yellows and reds. These are the kind of colours that you can use to adjust the skin tone. Now if you look here, my skin tone is a little bit more pink. I wouldn't really necessarily make it this pink usually, but I kind of quite like the look that I got with the pink and the blue. So as you can see here, it's kind of looking a little bit too yellow and a little bit too orange. So what you can do is essentially you can just kind of use your selector tool and drag it over the skin, and then you can just kind of play around by moving your mouse around to see what colour you prefer. But I don't like doing that because it adjusts more than one or two sliders at a time. So I like coming to my reds and essentially just sliding it all the way to the left or to the right to see what happens. Now personally I would never adjust my reds to the right, because as soon as you do that you start getting this really greeny yellow look to the skin or to the lips or anything, and the person that is in the photo starts looking a bit dead. So I never really do that. I kind of bring it down a little bit to the left. The oranges as well, if you bring it too far to the left you get really pink and then you get really green. So oranges are really kind of a hard one to kind of adjust, but if anything I bring them down to about -2. And then the yellows you can kind of get a bit more natural skin tone there. So again I usually bring those down to about -15. And then what I do is I'm just going to leave these ones for the time being, come back to them. I'm just going to take down the saturation of the orange a little bit on the skin. That's just going to take out a little bit of that vibrancy in the skin, because it was looking a little bit too saturated. And maybe the same with the reds, take those down to about -10. Okay, so that's basically the skin tone done. Obviously it's not identical to this image here, this one's a little bit more pink. If anything actually I think the image has a bit more clarity, so I am going to put in a little bit more clarity to the image. I know I said don't put in too much, but this one I think I put in about 30 to 40, and again I might come back and adjust that. I think yeah, 40 too much, so we're going to go with 35 for that. Again, I'm just kind of doing this off the top of my head. This is just my editing process as I go through editing a photo, so I haven't planned this all out beforehand, which is why I'm kind of jumping forwards and backwards, but I hope you kind of understanding what I'm doing at the moment. Okay, so to get this kind of nice smoky blue look that I really like, I have this, as you can see in lots of my images, that kind of tone. It's not really like a really saturated blue like this one here, and again, it's not really a teal kind of colour. So lots of people ask me how I get that kind of colour, and my secret essentially is bring the blues, the saturation or the hues of the blues down to the left, which will kind of give you this teal look you can see down here, but then I'd bring the aquas up to the right. Now, interestingly, there's not really much of the blue in the look of this image, so what you can do as well is I'll bring my white balance down a little bit as well. So if I bring my white balance down and then I bring my blues slider more towards the teal side and then my aquas up a bit, that kind of gives me more of this tealy light blue look. Then what I'll do is I'll come down to my luminance as I've done here. I'll bring up my luminance. So you see, as soon as you bring up the luminance, it brightens up the blues. Then what I'll do is I'll come down to the saturation of the blues and I'll drop the saturation a little bit. So immediately you can see the look that I'm going for there. I've got that nice kind of smoky blue kind of look. If anything, it's a little bit too teal, so I will bring my blues slider up a little bit too much. If I bring it too far to the right, I get more of a purple look, so you've got to kind of just adjust it to what you want. But I think that's looking pretty decent. If I do a before and an after, you can see already the big change that we've made just by making a few minor adjustments. Okay, so basically that's my saturation done. I wouldn't really do much with the yellows and greens because for this particular image, I really got the yellows in there. I might bring up the yellows a bit just to saturate the candle kind of thing over here a little bit more. Okay, so that's pretty much that done. With the luminance, I am going to bring up the yellows and the oranges a little bit just to brighten up the highlights on my skin and the highlights on the candle here, just to give it, again, a little bit more contrast. That's one way you can make really selective contrast, is by choosing a colour. So for example, there I said the highlights on the skin usually are the oranges. So what I'll do is I'll bring up the luminance of the oranges, and you can see already if I bring it up or bring it down, you can really change the contrast of the image on that particular section. So that's what I really like to do. I kind of like to adjust these around a little bit, so I will bring up the magentas a little bit, or the purples rather, just to kind of give me a little bit more control over where the contrast is and where the contrast isn't. Okay, when I come down to split toning, what I like to do is essentially bring up my saturation to probably about 10 to 15, and then just slide my highlights slider along. Now, with this particular image here, what I just kind of thought I wanted to do was put in some blues into the image. So you can either go ahead and put blues in with the highlights, or you can go ahead and you can put blues in with the shadows. So I can't remember exactly what I did for this photo, but I think I put dark blues in the shadows and a bit more teal or blues in the highlights as well. So we'll come to the shadows in a minute, but what I do is I click down the hue and I hold down the Alt or the Option key, and that will essentially just show me the full block colour of the image, and I slide along essentially until the image starts looking like it would work. So that kind of teal colour I think should work quite nicely. If I turn it off and on, yeah, maybe a little bit less tealy and put in a little bit more blue. So I really quite like the look of that. Then with the shadows as well, you can hold down the Alt key and slide along to the colour. So usually blue again, turn it off and turn it on. Now usually I wouldn't do necessarily the same colour for the highlights and the shadows. That's because I'm doing that because I want this image to look very blue. Usually what I would do is I'd probably put in a different kind of colour to the two. So I might even try putting in some yellows into the highlights. So come into the yellows or the oranges, put those in the highlights, and then put orange, take down the saturation of the highlights, maybe to about 10, and then put the blues in the shadows. So if I turn that off and on, it's a very subtle change. I think actually I am going to stick with what I had beforehand and put those up to, I think it was 218. Maybe leave the saturation down to about 10 as well. So already you can see how much more blue the image was looking. So if I did before, you can see how dark orange and grey the image was, and then after the edit that I've kind of done. Okay, so that is basically the split toning done for these images. Then I come down to the sharpening and the noise reduction. Now I usually do put a bit of noise reduction in my images, probably about 5, because obviously I have been controlling the shadows quite a bit and bringing those up, and messing about with the exposures and the luminance of things, which usually introduces a bit of noise to your image. So I do like to adjust that a little bit. Sharpening I kind of leave as standard really. If you want to, you can put it up, but I really don't really do much with my sharpening. I try and make sure my images are in focus in camera rather than doing it in post. I'm going to put that up a little bit more. It's looking a little bit too grainy for my liking. And then I usually come all the way down, I skip all this effect, the vignetting and all the camera calibration, and I come all the way down to the camera calibration here. And now what I do like to do is control the red and the blue primary. I don't really do much with the green primary. Sometimes you can get some really cool effects with the green primary, but sometimes it does make the image look a bit strange. Now with this particular image I did adjust the green primary just to kind of get a little bit more adjustment to the blues and the skin tones. So you see if I bring that up to the right, we get a slightly different blue look. It kind of brightens it up. So probably about +5, only very subtle. Now the red primaries, you can go ahead and adjust these, but again, if I bring it to the right, the skin looks really green, or to the left it looks really pink. So I'll probably bring that to the right a tiny bit. You'll see why in a second. And if I bring the blue primary down to the left a little bit, to about -30 or something, so you can see if I make these adjustments, it kind of very subtle change. You can barely even see it actually, but I do like just doing that just to make sure that I've tried everything to get the image to look as I want it. So there we go, guys. That's pretty much it. Very simple edit just to get this change in look to the photo. So if I do a before and an after, you can see the difference there. So again, if you do want me to go ahead and save this as a preset pack or something for you guys and put it on the website so you guys can go ahead and purchase like how I edit my photos, then do go ahead and leave a comment or send me a DM on my Instagram. Go ahead, chuck me a follow over there and I will reply to you. What I am going to do though is I'm going to show you how I edited a different style photo. Okay, so this is the second photo that I kind of wanted to show you guys how to edit. Now this one, it hasn't been posted onto my feed just yet. This one will be posted probably in a couple of days actually, but I do want to show you how I edited this one, just kind of as a sneak peek for you guys on YouTube, so you can see roughly what I'm doing in the background, but before I start posting onto Instagram. And if you do want some more behind the scenes stuff, just send me a DM and I will kind of tell you what I'm up to and stuff, and you can see it on my story and stuff. But this one was one of my most favourite photos that I've taken in quite a long time now. As I said, I do like doing portrait photography and landscape photography, and I kind of mix the two up. And as you can see here, I usually have portrait, landscape, portrait, landscape, portrait, landscape, portrait, landscape, portrait. So that's kind of the way I'm doing it. I kind of switch the two up so my feed doesn't really get too clogged up with portrait stuff. But equally it doesn't get clogged up with landscape. And it's also good for me because then if I decide I want to go straight into doing landscape stuff, then my viewers and my followers are kind of used to seeing both. So it's not really like they're going to be saying, well, where did that come from? Like, you never post landscape stuff. So it kind of keeps the door open for me. But again, this is one of my most favourite photos that I've taken in a long time. Now this is down in France, this is down in Etretat. I just really love this image and the way it kind of turned out. So this one will be on my feed soon. So if you do want to see all of that stuff, there's going to be a second one that's similar to this one as well. Do go ahead and give me a follow. So what I will do is I'm going to show you how I edited this one. So if I click reset here, this is the before. Now what I did is I did a little bit of pre-editing in Photoshop. I kind of put in the mist up here, so you can see it's a little bit misty up here. I kind of basically used a brush tool and brushed in a bit of mist just over the top of the cliff here and kind of made it a little bit darker, and then kind of made the sea a little bit softer. So I just did some minor tweaks and kind of extended the image a little bit. Just did those tweaks in Photoshop just to make the composition look a little bit better. Now again, this is all use of my photos and stuff, so I think it's perfectly fine for me to kind of just adjust a few things. But what I do is when I come into Photoshop, I kind of look at these images and I start thinking about what I want to start doing with them. Now, out of the camera and out of this, out of Photoshop, this looks pretty much perfect. I would be very happy to go ahead and post this. But again, if I just undo the settings, you can see I much prefer the way that looked with all the colours and the fade and stuff that I put into the photo. Okay, so the first thing that I did is I kind of brought up the exposure just a tiny amount, probably to about plus 0.2, something like that, and added in a little bit more contrast as well. Then I came down to the highlights, brought the highlights down a little bit I think, and then brought up the shadows, just kind of give me a little bit more detail in the image. Brought up the whites as well I think, just to kind of brighten up the image, and then brought down the blacks as well, just kind of give, again, a little bit more contrast. So before and after, very subtle changes, but as you can see, there's a little bit more detail on the image down here. You can see a little bit more of what's going on. So if I do the before, it's a lot darker down here, and your eyes are kind of drawn up here. Do the after, your eyes are now drawn in this kind of region down here. So if anything, I can bring up the shadows a tiny bit more, just kind of bring in a little bit more exposure or lightness to this certain part of the image. Then I come down to the clarity, again, put in a bit of clarity to my photos. This one I don't want to put in too much because it's a landscape photo, and if I start whacking up the clarity loads, it looks a bit gross looking. This really nags me. I see a lot of people's photos and they tag me in them as well. They post their photos and their photos kind of look like this, and they basically just got the clarity slider and they said, oh, okay, this looks quite cool. What I'll do is I'll just whack it all up to 100. Please be careful when you do that, because it really does make your photo look a little bit strange when you bring it up too high. Obviously a bit of clarity is good for your photo, but just be careful when you use these things in moderation. And then, as I said in the previous photo, I bring my vibrancy down a little bit. This kind of look that I went for, my theme was a little bit more desaturated, I think. So that's the kind of look I was going for. Okay, now I came down to this hue, saturation, luminance panel. Now with this photo, there are essentially only 2 or 3 colours in the photo. I've got blues and aquas, and then basically just the greens and the yellows in the grass here. So there's not really much control I have over what this image looks like. But again, to get that kind of nice look to the sea, bring the blues down, bring the aquas up, and then bring the luminance up, maybe not quite that high, and then bring the saturation down a little bit. Okay, so that is kind of a nice look to the sea. I really like brightening up and kind of giving it not really super teal look, but that kind of nice soft blue look. Okay, and then with regards to the grass over here, you can either choose to bring it all the way down to like the brown and yellow side, especially bring the greens down as well. But I kind of did it a bit in moderation. I brought the yellows down a little bit, and then brought the greens down a bit, just kind of giving more of that brown look to the grass. And then you go before and then the after. So I kind of quite like the before, and I do really kind of like the after as well. But again, personal preference as you go through and do these edits. Then I put in the split toning, the shadows. I wanted to be kind of the dark blue in the shadows, kind of dark blue purple. So probably about down here. And immediately I like the way that makes the image look. Then with the highlights, because I've got the sunset over here, I kind of quite like putting in a bit of orange in the highlights there, just kind of highlight the sunset there. So if I turn that off and on, very subtle change, but definitely kind of makes the blend the image together all a little bit nicer. Then again, noise reduction, I think that was about 10 to 15, and then come down to the camera calibration, bring my blue primary to the left a little bit, and my red primary to the right a little bit, just to kind of give me that very rough orange and teal look. And then there we go, that's basically the photo edited, so before and then the after there. So really simple editing, guys. I really hope you like the way I go ahead and edit these photos. I think that was a slightly different edit. I did save the previous one as a preset here, so I will add that back because I think I preferred that first one. But there we go, so that's a very similar edit to the one I showed you at the beginning before I started editing. But I hope you enjoyed this video, guys, just showing you how I go ahead and edit these different photos so I can get this blue uniform look to my feed, where I can combine like these portraits and these landscapes. So again, I really hope you enjoyed that. If you do want these presets, whatever, just send me a DM or something, or leave a comment down below and I will make some presets for my Instagram feed, and I will put them up on my website. But again, please do go ahead and give me a follow and see if we can get me to 5K, and I will see you in the next video, guys. Live long and prosper.